Welcome back everybody, Nick here for another Cinema 4D tutorial, and today we're going to be covering a super simple but nice technique and with very little keyframes, to have a low poly reactive water. So I set up a quick little scene here. It's an ocean, a low poly ocean, and I just threw a quick buoy here, and if we go ahead and we play, the buoy is actually moving with the water. It's dipping down, the water's kind of forming around it, and there's barely any keyframes. I think there's 3, maybe 4 keyframes throughout this whole 90 frame animation, so 3 seconds. But super easy, and yeah, we'll hop right into it and I'll show you guys how to do this. So I'm going to create a new file here, and now we have our open fresh file. The first thing that we're going to do is we are going to grab a plane, and now we want to make this plane much bigger. So I'm going to go 5,000 centimeters by 5,000 centimeters. Now I got a nice big plane here. Now one thing that I'm going to want to do is I want to turn on my garage shading lines. So under the display, I'm going to turn on garage shading lines. Now I can see our lines that form our polygons. The second thing that we're going to want to do is adjust our width and height segments. So I'm going to switch these to 100 by 100. And it's going to give us these little squares. These might be a little bit big, so we can even bring this down to 80 or 80. 80 by 80. So now that we got our plane, which is going to be our water, now we want to set it so for the animation so that it deforms and it moves around and it has some organic random movement. This actually doesn't have any keyframes. All you got to do is grab a displacer. We're going to make it a child of the plane object, and we're going to come into shading, and we're going to click the little arrow, and we're just going to click a noise. So it's going to throw our noise in here, and then all you got to do is click on to the noise shader and come down to animation speed, and you can put whatever you want, but I'm using 1. So as soon as you click 1 and you go ahead and click play, you get this kind of organic slow movement, and it's very hard to see. It's not very much. So if we come back into the objects tab of our displacer and we start to move this up to probably around 40, now we can really start to see the displacer working with our plane, deforming all of our little lines. Now when I go ahead and render, it looks terrible and it doesn't look low poly at all. The one thing that you have to make sure you do when you're working with low poly is you want to delete this Phong tag. So just click on it and delete, and right away you're going to notice that we get all of these very hard edges and our low poly look that we are going for. So I'm going to come into my render settings, and I'm just going to set anti-aliasing to best. I'm going to throw ambient occlusion in there, and I'm going to throw a global illumination in there. I'll throw physical sky. I'm going to bring it so that it's almost nighttime, so about 1600 hours. And I'm just going to leave it on the date, which is March 18th, or March 7th, 2018. So if I go ahead and render this out quickly, it shouldn't take too long because there's nothing in our scene. Now we get this nice look here. We get the shadows from our water and all that stuff. So now we want to make a nice texture here for our water or our ocean or whatever you want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and double click down here to make a new texture, and we're going to come on in to the color tab. Now come into the blues. You can choose whatever blue you want, but I like this dark these dark blues that are almost on the gray side, so right in the middle here. And under reflection or reflectance, I'm going to remove the default layers that it has, and I'm going to add a Beckman. Now, there's a few things that I'm going to do. First, for the attenuation, I'm going to add this to additive, so that it's going to add this layer to our color layer. So as soon as I click additive, it changes slightly blue. I'm going to bring down the reflection to about maybe 40. 40-ish seems pretty good. I'm going to bring the specular down to like 2 or 3%, and I'm going to bring the roughness to about 3 or 4%. You can play around what works for you. And then for this global specular and global reflection brightness, I'm just going to bring the specular all the way down, and I'm going to bring the reflection brightness to like 25. Should work. And under transparency, you can go and add a water refraction. You can either use the normal water or the water ice, and then you can just drop it down. You don't want the water to be too see-through because it will up your render time like crazy. Well, especially when you have other objects in the scene, but when global illumination is, and it doesn't give it its actual color very well. So we're just going to drop it down to like, we'll try 5-ish. You don't necessarily need to add a transparency, but just a very light transparency gives it a little bit of depth and a little bit of noise on the surface that help a small bit. So we got it rendered out here. These cubes are actually, or our little segments here, are actually a little small. So I'm going to drop these down to about, I'm going to do about 60 by 60 to get these larger segments. And I'm going to come back into the reflection. I'm going to up that to about 50 for our reflection brightness. And we'll try to re-render this. It's all just trial and error and what you prefer. So you can go inside these settings in the material editor and you can mess around. You can find out what works best for you and what exact look you're trying to get. So now we can find a good angle here. Physical sky. I'm going to bring it I'm going to do 8 in the morning. It's got a different kind of light to the sun when it comes up. With the physical sky, it changes the color of the sun as where it is in the sky. And it's just going to make our scene look a little bit darker. We just got to find the lights coming from that way. So I'm going to put the highlight of the light up here. Once again, it's all about how you want your scene to look. So trial and error for whatever you guys want, but you just keep moving around, keep doing little tweaks until you find what you like best. And this is looking real nice. We got the hot light from the sun coming in on this direction. We have our dark shadowy places on the back. And I think this is looking great. So I'm actually going to throw a camera in there and at my spot that I want to keep as my scene. And I am terrible at exiting cameras. I always move my cameras. So I'm just going to right click and I'm going to throw a protection tag on my camera. So even if I do enter my camera and I try to move, I can't. So that's a little tip for if anybody else is terrible at exiting cameras after you entered them. I always screw up my cameras. Alright, so now that we got our scene, we have our water, we can go ahead and do a quick little model of our buoy. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide our plane just so that we can model quickly without too much stuff in the way. So I'm just going to grab a sphere. It is fairly large, so I'm going to drop it down to 50. And we're going to go ahead and make this editable by clicking this button on the top left corner. Now what we can do is enter the points mode. And we're going to come into whatever, the right view, the front view, the left view, whatever you have. And we're just going to delete the top half points of our sphere. Actually, just under the top half, because we don't want to delete the center line. Because since we're using the points, it'll delete the entire next segment if we do. So I'm just going to bring this up to 50 and make sure this only select visible elements is off, so that it'll select all of the points even on the side of the sphere that we can't see. So I'll go ahead and select the top half, excluding the middle row. We don't want that, and just delete it. So now we have this half a sphere with an open top. We don't want it to have an open top, so there's a super easy fix here. In polygon mode, just right click on this on your scene and go to close polygon hole and hover over the edge of your sphere and click, and now we got a solid polygon on the top. Now we're just going to do a quick little render or a quick little model of a buoy. So I'm going to highlight this main polygon. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go inner extrude. So what that's going to do is shrink the polygon. I'm going to do an extrude. So this is just right clicking and then choosing between bevel, extrude, and inner extrude are pretty much the three that I use. So now that we come up, I'm going to go back to bevel and we're going to bevel it in. Now we're going to go back to inner extrude. We're going to do those 3 steps again. So inner extrude, and then right click, extrude it up a little bit, and then right click bevel, bevel it in till we get a small cylinder here, and then we can extrude this up some ways, like so. And then if you right click on, if you click inner extrude, but you drag the other way, you actually expand the polygon further than what the object is. So then when we go ahead and right click our extrude, we've created this wider polygon than what there was before. And for this cap, I want a round top, which you can use the bevel for. You just need to change the number of subdivisions to 5, and then when you go ahead and you drag it out, you get a nice rounded top. And then for the very last polygon, I'm just going to right click and I'm going to drag the extrude inwards so we get this little hole at the top. And I'm just going to click and throw a just a simple light in our scene, and I'm going to position this at the top of our object, and I'm going to drop that as a child. And this light is kind of just the beacon. So all you got to do for the light is go no illumination, change the visible light to visible, and I'm going to make this red, and I'm just going to crank this up to about 300, and I'm just going to lower down the size of visibility on the light. So when we go ahead and render here, we can see it's visible. If we want to take this one step further, we can quickly go ahead and make a luminant material that's the same color as the light, so it's red. And when we click on our sphere with our polygon mode selected, since our last polygon is that one down there, we can place our luminant material by placing it over highlighted polygons. And now just that one in there is going to be selected. And when we go ahead and re-render this, it doesn't look so much like it's a light on top, but it looks more like the luminance material inside is emitting some light. If you want to get really fancy, you can crank this up to like 300, so it's a brighter light on the inside. All right, so now we got part of our buoy. On the other scene, I just added some stabilizers, but for the tutorial, I'm just going to leave it. So we have our buoy, and the reason that we made the light a child of the object is now when we move our buoy, the light stays exactly where it is, so that we don't have to keyframe the buoy and the light. Buoy. I don't know how to spell it, but that's how we're spelling it. Alrighty. So now what we want to do is we have our buoy. We're going to bring back our plane by unclicking those two spheres here. The top one is hide in editor and the bottom one is hide in render view. So once you double click those, it turns it off for both. All right, so we have our plane, that's our water, we have our buoy, everything's going good. When we hit play, our water's shifting around and all is good. Now we want our buoy to interact with our water. So there's a nice simple way to do this. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab a collision deformer and we're going to make it a second child of the plane. Now make sure you don't make it a child of the displacer, but a child of the plane object. It doesn't matter if it's on top or below of the displacer. I'm just going to keep it on the bottom. Alright, so now what this is going to do is it's going to let once we do some settings here, it's going to let the buoy kind of tell the water that something's pushing against it, and the water is going to move accordingly. So under this colliders tab, there's objects. So we need to let the water know what the object is that it's going to be colliding with. So we can drag and drop our buoy in there. Now as soon as we do this, and I move my buoy closer down to the water, you can see the water starts to flex a little bit. And it starts to flex with the water. I'm going to change this solver to outside, and that just gives it a little bit more play before it just realizes that it's too far and it pops back where it was. So we have all this play right now with our water. We don't want it to go all the way down here because that's unrealistic for water. But if we play with the surface here, you can see it bounces nicely on the surface and we can get some good movement here. So this buoy is the only thing that we're going to have to keyframe. So let's come back to our camera and let's choose a good location for our buoy. I'm liking around here. The thing about the collider is it collides with these points. So try your best to get it where there's intersecting lines, because then it kind of flexes a little bit better than if you're in between. See what I mean? Like when I have it in between a polygon without points there, it intersects with the water, but as soon as I move it over where there's a point, it pushes down. So when you have it where the point is the best spot. So I'm going to put it here. So that's about here in my scene. So now we're going to set a few little keyframes. So buoys are never really perfectly upright. So I'm going to go ahead here and tip it to the side a little bit so that when we're looking at our camera, it's off perfect. And at 0 frames, I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm going to move it forward about 30. And then we're just going to go ahead and rotate it a different direction and move it down a little bit. And then we're going to go another keyframe. So now this is our first movement we have here between our two keyframes. And it really looks like it's rocking with that water, because as you can see on this side of the buoy, as it moves forward, this drops. And that's because the buoy is rotating and pushing that point down. So then we can move another second forward to about 60, and maybe it can go back this way and up to the side a little bit. So now we get this nice little rocking motion. It kind of looks like it's just bouncing back where it was before. So I'm going to rotate it a little bit more to this side, so that we have kind of a dynamic and fluid motion. And then for our last one, we can put it wherever you want. You can rotate it almost back where it was at the beginning. You always want to do a little rotation and then a little movement of the actual object is what I find best. So we have 4 keyframes throughout this whole thing, and this is the whole animation that we've gotten so far. There's only one thing here that I'm not liking, is between 30 and 60 frames, the bottom of the buoy moves quite a bit, which I don't really like, because usually they're chained or something to the ground. So the bottom won't really move. It's more so the top that just kind of rocks back and forth. So I'm going to move this in a little bit, and I'm going to adjust that keyframe. So now when you look, it doesn't, it's more of a natural movement with the water. It's not moving so much side to side, which I prefer. You can slow down or speed up your animation, but if we go ahead here and I'm just going to leave the default material for our buoy for now, but if I go ahead and render our little scene, you're going to see that we get we have our scene, we have our nice reflections with our water, we have our nice shadow, we have our buoy, we have the hot light from the sun from coming in on this top corner. And it's hard to see now, but if you were to render the scene out, you could see the buoy kind of dipping in and out of the water and the water pushing a little bit more. But yeah, so this is a very easy way to make low poly interactive water. You can throw a boat in there, you can make an iceberg, endless. You can put a log, a tree, a car, I don't know. It's endless. As long as you're using this collider and displacer, you can do whatever you want. You can even come into the shading. You can make the animation faster. So if I set this to 5, it's going to go absolutely insane. If I set this to 0.5, it'll be a slower movement. So I like 1. It gives it a nice little flow to the water, which is the look I was going for, but it all depends what you guys are working on, and you just tweak these options to whatever works best for you guys. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and hopefully you guys learned something from it. If you liked the video, hit that like button, and I will talk to you all next time. See you guys.